Let me introduce you briefly Dr. Stefan Dilov. Stefan Dilov is a specialist on Eastern European history. This topic he has devoted many articles and books, and notably he is now engaged on a project of the minority protection system of the League of Nations between 1920 and 1934. And he has been, until quite recently, if I'm not wrong, related to the chair of Eastern European history at the University of Bern in Switzerland. Well, Stefan Dilov has taken up some topics I dealt with in my PhD thesis a long time ago, from a new angle, from a new perspective, which is much more refreshing. And therefore, I'm glad to welcome him here at this conference. He's going to talk about from nationalities to minorities, the transnational debate on the League's minority protection system after World War I. The floor is yours.
Okay. First of all, I will just start with a short introduction how I came to the topic of this speech. When I saw the first program, I saw everybody was to speak about nationalities and just me about minorities. And then I wondered, what is the difference? And there is an opinion in the literature that nationalities became minorities after World War I. And then I wanted to prove this in my sources. I had a second temptation, but I could resist not to speak of Galicia, which I'm a specialist of, but it's Eastern Galicia and the Polish-Ukrainian problem, which is the Galician nationality problem in the interwar period for the European public. There is Galicia, but it's not in Spain. It's in Poland or Ukraine, just to give you an idea. But I included, with the help of José Manuel's books, something about the Catalans, and it gives you an idea maybe why the term nationality stayed in the discourse, because I would say nationality groups, or today we would maybe say ethnic groups, a term which is totally absent from the debates. So this is maybe one of the reasons, and I will just show you the research question, and I can begin, which is a very good point of continuity to Francesca's speech with Anatole de Moncy, who abandoned the teaching of non-French from primary school, so he was extremely unpopular in the international minority movement. But he wrote some articles, and in one of these articles he stated that the problem of national minorities has replaced the problem of nationalities. That would mean, for the French context, there is no minority problem in France because there has not been a nationality problem. So that's just to give you the context. And then I have a quote from the Slovene president of this Congress of European Nationalities, a Slovene living in Trieste, coming out of the Habsburg context. And he said that his organization, all the participants use the notions minorities, nationalities haphazardly, remarking that a fixed linguistic usage has not evolved yet. I will show you that I don't agree. For the research literature, for those of you who can read German, there's one article on Begriffsgeschichte, conceptual history, by Kai Struve, who traced it back to the debates in 1848 in the German and the Austrian discussions. He concludes that the term national minority originated in discussions how the majority principle could be applied in a society with national non-uniform citizenship. That is a working discussions, but one has to say he was only looking in the German-speaking context in this article, and just at the end saying that there are similar evolutions in the French and the English-speaking discussions, but here the term minority, it means a national minority in this nation state will always be in the minority in parliamentary votes. They will always be overvoted because of their belonging to a different nationality. Is not that leftist and rightist parties can cooperate or not. The sense what they are looking a solution for in Austria is that they need a solution that national groups are not constantly overvoted by other national groups. This is the origin of the discussion, and just to give you the context, what I now try is a transnational perspective with a term which is used in, I would say, 100 ways at least, but what I want to indicate is that the organizations and activists that are in the center of my paper aimed to influence a discussion that took place beyond the structure of a nation state and nation states as a whole, and aimed at first to influence a European public, and secondly, the activities of the League of Nations. So this is something I will underline, and most of the participants are not government agents. Sometimes it's very difficult to divide between state and non-state actors, but some of these people represent their private opinions, and they have the resources to do so. What I try is to focus on the terminology used in the discussions on nationality and minority questions, which is problematic for the linguistic reasons. Most of the discussions are in German, French, and English, and the notions are not equivalent. So the German nationalité does not imply the citizenship as the nationalité in French. There is a famous book on nationality and the peace treaties by an Irish scholar, and this is about minority problems and all this statelessness. This is, I won't touch this problem of stateless people here, but it's one discourse, one say. And the second problem is you have notions such as race and folk, which are in the discourse. The race falls out for it is in the minority treaties about racial minorities, but the people never talk about race. I would say for the reason that race could imply that there are minorities in South Africa or Japan or immigrants to Australia and the United States, and that is to separate these discourses. And for folk, there is an ideological turn in the German discussions, which leads to what is called the folkish ideology. So this is extremely right-wing nationalism. So, but the problem is most of the researchers didn't care, and you can read in the literature that, for example, the Interparliamentary Union discussed in the 1880s the question of national minorities. I doubt this. I had not the time to look up the archives, but I doubt that they used the term national minorities in the 1880s. That is a researcher who put the sources wrong. But that's just an educated guess. But you can see this, the problem is I can only take direct quotes from secondary literature for my approach. Just to show you a very famous book on Austria-Hungary and the nationality question, the racial problems in Hungary. This is a term used in 1908, a very influential book. The Hungarians would argue one of the books that destroyed Hungary, and they always wanted to have a similar pro-Hungarian author. But you can see Sutton Watson addresses the vital question of nationality, and then later you have the racial question in Hungary. This is what I would say an equivalent use, but it gives me an excellent opportunity to switch to the origins of the Union of Nationality that José Manuel mentioned yesterday. The origins started and the idea of the Universal Race Congress. So you see there is a connection between race and the anthropologists who discuss the rights of races, or the whole concept. So this is the starting point. A Lithuanian in exile, Josas Gabris, meets a French journalist, Jean Pélissier, and they get the idea to organize something like a Universal Nationalities Congress. And they do it in Paris the year later. The topic they discuss are independence, autonomy, and self-government. Minority rights are absolutely not mentioned. These nationality groups don't want minority rights. It's not the concept of the day. You can see the active participation of Catalans and Irish, which is important here, and the place where these minorities or nationality groups link is Paris and later Lausanne, so it's geographically closer to Western Europe than other places, that's why I yesterday asked for the communications. It's because it's not that easy to travel in Europe at that times, and if different people want to cooperate, they need a good place to meet with infrastructure. So Vienna is a good place for obvious reasons, but it's difficult for the Catalans to travel to Vienna, for example. For the rest of the people, it's easier. So it's just to give you an idea that such things can matter as well for the networking, and that maybe one of the reasons why galleries are totally absent. It may be too expensive to travel such distances if you have no foreign sponsor. So they cooperated with the League of, I've given this English translation, I'm not very happy of, the League of Allogenic Peoples of Russia. The German is Liga der Fremdvölker Russlands, a term you cannot translate in good English or any language. So I can feel with the translator the task to translate this Liga der Fremdvölker, but that's a German-sponsored idea, and that's why a lot of nationalities from the, or you can say ethnic group, there are a lot of Muslim group from the Caucasus united here, but they participate, and the Union of Nationalities thereby becomes anti-Russian, pro-German, and I would say it becomes useless because it's obvious that this should use the German war aims and to destroy Russia from within, and from the other side, the nationalities principle is used to destroy Austria-Hungary from within. So this principle of nationalities is part of the war game, and both sides use it to win the war and to gain more resources. This is the context. I just want to add that this discourse is not only in spoken language, but you can see it in maps as well, what is called carte ethnographique in French, ethnographic map sometimes, but the German notion would clearly be a Völkerkarte or a Nationalitätenkarte. You would never say a ethnographische Karte. This is just to see that there are different words. So here you have the ethnic connection, and for those of you who are interested, you see the Galicians are in the same color as the Portuguese, just to see that this, and it covers nationality groups and not these small groups which are maybe 30% in the territory. If you would look at Bohemia, there is just one color, or what later became Yugoslavia, that should be a mixture of colors. So this is not the minority concept here. You can see it's something like a majority principle. And of course, the data was not there to give a good map. But it's just a start, and such maps will be part of the propaganda game in Versailles and later on for the discussion about revision of the peace treaties. But that would be an interesting topic somebody should have a look at, but that's just to give you an idea what can be done. So what takes part in the war? All organizations either are on one side of the war, or the neutral organizations cannot meet because there are travel restrictions for participants. And it's, for example, for the British, it's forbidden to meet Germans. They don't get passports if they go to a meeting to meet Germans. This is forbidden in the war to cooperate with the enemy. But nevertheless, the Central Organization for a Durable Peace, an initiative from Dutch and Scandinavian pacifists to stop the war and to make a peace treaty that will ensure a durable peace and not one for a short period. They meet, and the Germans and the Austrians and the Hungarians take part in the discussions, and they have the first declaration, and they say the peace treaties should provide a guarantee of civil equality, religious liberty, and free language use for all nationalities within the state. So here you have maybe another inspiration for your language brotherhood, 1915 declaration of free language use for all nationalities within a state. That could be coincidence, maybe it was just in the air, maybe there is a connection, but just to see that the language question and the religious question are in the center of the beginning. What are minority rights? It's about language, that means school, primary school education, and religion, in what language is the religious service. So that goes on the discussion. They speak about freedom of national minorities, autonomy, minority protection, nationality rights, the national registers from the Austrian ideas are taken in. So the idea is, how do we define who belongs to a nationality group or not? So they say we need to register. That what Malte Rolf showed for the Soviet passport. They had this sort of national cataster. So this is just the ideas. And then, very interesting, they refer to the Austrian constitution in their model treaty. Halvard Koht was given as a proponent of Norwegian historiography yesterday, so he also participated in this Central Organization for a Durable Peace, and he was the author of this model treaty. I give it in French because of the translation problems, and it says: Chaque race faisant partie d'un État contractant a le droit inviolable de maintenir et cultiver sa nationalité et sa langue. And I marked nationality and language here as the components to which are somehow equal. There is nationality and there is language. So it can be that you have language rights and you are not a nationality. That's how I would interpret it. It's not saying you must have a nationality and a language, but so what you can see is the Austrian, respectively Habsburg political thought totally dominates this transnational discourse. And to be correct, this is about ideas which are discussed in Austria and are not put into practice. We heard Otto Bauer yesterday and the concept of cultural autonomy. So most of the things that are discussed are not really put into practice or were voted and introduced in the law, but could not see if it works or not. And there is, of course, an Austrian war aim behind it. The Austrian participants wanted to show that Austria-Hungary is not the prison of people, but it's the champion of nationality and minority rights, and the Austrian example has to be followed. And you can see the Scandinavians accept the argument and say, yes, that's the way we should do it. So then it comes to the minority treaties, and of course the Scandinavians and the Austrians don't have a word in the preparation of the treaties. There are several treaties and declarations, and they have similar provisions. It's mainly about the use of minority languages in administration. If you have for example, a very important point to use your language in court, if you have a court case, that you don't need to hire a translator, that you can speak in your language. That may be natural today, but that was not natural at that time, and it's some of the important points. But these treaties are not very clear. You can speak if there is a considerable proportion of the population, but they don't say how much, and then You can, for example, if you have a city, there are living people from one nationality, so you just enlarge the city and add some villages around, and they are not a considerable proportion anymore. So this is just to show you that the treaties gave a language, but it was the practice that decided. And so to understand why such treaties cannot protect anybody in the practice and the way in which they are applied. You see, again, you have the distinction of birth, nationality, language, race, or religion. So you have these four categories, and for the Polish model treaty, again, the stress on freedom of religion, which is, of course, an older discourse. And of course, you can see there are some ways for the national states to deny these rights if they are inconsistent with public order or public morals. And again, nobody says what is public order and public morals. So just to give you an idea of the problems, just for the regions that are marked, I just marked the states here. Austria had to sign a treaty as well. Turkey had to sign a treaty, and even in the 30s, when Iraq became independent, Iraq had to sign a minority treaty as well. So it's a concept that comes to the Near East as well, but in this context to protect Christian minorities against Muslim domination. So it's not for Kurds in Turkey because they are not Christians, but you can see that the idea spreads. And just to give you an idea of the legacy of the central organization of a durable peace, there is Rudolf Laun, the Austrian participant, and Swede Theodor Adelswerd. They always spoke of nationalities and minorities, and they never did equate these terms. Adelswerd became the president of the Interparliamentary Union and failed to influence the discussions. He also participated in the International Federation of League of Nations Societies. That can be explained because he became the president of this union, the Interparliamentary Union. And explain is a forum for members of parliaments to discuss. It started to support the arbitration movement and then debated all fields for parliaments, and it was a representation from leftist to rightist party center. Everybody who was interested could join, but there is a pacifist core in the Interparliamentary Union. On the other hand, Laun became the guiding spirit and the authority in German-speaking legal discourses and minority and nationality rights. All his dictionary or encyclopedia entries link nationality and minority rights, but he stopped to participate in transnational association, even not in the International Law Association, where he would have been a good specialist. But here he left the field open to Völkisch thinkers in Germany and Austria that gained priority in the 1930s. Laun was a social democrat. When he was in Hamburg, he joined the German social democratic parties, and that is something, the position of an outsider. And for the Austrian context, he participated in this debate about Länderautonomie, which is again a term impossible to translate. It was not about autonomy for nationality groups, but for regions. So an autonomy for Austrian Silesia, for example, where there were Germans, Poles, and Czechs, but not for something like a separate crown land for Czechs or anything. That was not the concept that was discussed here. So the Interparliamentary Union, they discussed minority problems very intensively, but linked them always to the minority protection system of the League or recent border changes. They developed the idea to create paritative committees. That was presented in 23, and these committees should have functioned within a given state or a region and should have consisted of members of all ethnic groups, and they should help to settle disputes between minority groups and the state outside a legal framework. Something like that was a Swiss idea, and it was modeled on the participation of trade unions in debate on the labor legislation. That was the idea. If we can make trade unions participate and debate problems without legal frameworks, why can't we do it with nationalities if it functions in the realm of labor conflicts? So, but it didn't work. But it was just one idea, and to show you how these people tried to find solutions that were not legal frameworks. As I show you, legal frameworks could very easily be violated in the sense of the term, but not in the legal terms. That was what turned out from the very beginning, that these treaties did not really protect minorities against planned or unplanned abuses of state officials. I would say these members use plenary discussions to voice their grievances, and here it's different from the other organizations. I pretend because they are members of parliament who want to win the next election. So they must voice extreme positions, and it didn't help. The Interparliamentary Union before 1914 worked much more better because there were people who looked for solutions, and now came people who needed votes. And of course, these speeches were printed in the press, and they had all their voters in mind. And of course, Hungarians voiced their grievances. Romanians praised Romania's minority policy as exemplary. If you look at it today, you can just laugh. But that's why the work was not very productive. And then they said, okay, let's start to found a committee for minority problems. And then they even founded a subcommittee that was reduced to 6 members. And there are no written proceedings, so therein they could really look for solutions, and they decided to have 3 minority representatives and 3 state representatives. And they immediately took up this idea of paritative commissions. And what I found interesting, in 23, one of the minority representatives is the Catalan Joan Estelrich. So you see, until then, the minority representatives came from Eastern Europe. There was always one Jew. At the beginning, there was a Swede from Finland, and the Josef Wilpan, the Slovene from Italy, for the different, you could say, racial groups. So you have a Scandinavian or German, a Jew, and a Slavonic. But then they discovered there is a nationality problem in Western Europe as well. But this is 32. I will later try to convince you that this is no coincidence. The International Federation of League of Nations Societies is different here. Most members are not parliamentarians or party politicians. They just have ideas and want to put them into practice. The members of the Minorities Committee of this international federation regularly travel to Central and Eastern Europe to know what they are talking about. And so they have an expertise based on field studies, I could say, and they directly talk to the people, of course, mainly in German, which was the lingua franca of the discourses. So the voices were not so representative, but it was an idea to gain. And they also published a journal, a very important one, to address the French audience, Les Minorités Nationales, from 27 to 33. And just to come back to the autonomy idea, autonomy was never discussed, only in 23 with the situation in Eastern Galicia, because Poland voted an autonomy law, and then the Allied powers decided to cede Eastern Galicia to Poland, but then the autonomy law was never put into practice, and the Ukrainians hardly complained, but that was not linked to the minority treaties, so that could not become part of the discourse, because the autonomy was not part of the Polish minority treaties. So this is something which nobody really cared about. I would say the same with the autonomy for the Carpathian region in Czechoslovakia. That was in the Czechoslovak Minority Treaty. It was never put into practice, but again, these intellectuals did not care much about these autonomy solutions. Minority rights were the dominant discourse in the 20s, but then you have the occasional participation of Catalan delegates. Spain here is not really a matter of concern, but what is important, Italy is a matter of concern. The Slovenes and the Germans are constantly on the agenda because they cannot petition the League, so they use this International Federation of League of Nations societies, and interestingly, they once also talk about the Aosta Valley when the French delegate puts the case on the agenda, which is rare because the French normally never defended minority rights because it could have a setback that nobody wants to France. So now we have the Congress of European Nationalities, and I wondered, of course, why the gathering of minorities. In Balázs papers, you will see he used, it's a Congress of European minorities or nationalities. So you can see the term nationalities is somehow seen as not the term of the day. But I looked it up, I couldn't find an explanation. They send out the invitations to a first gathering of European nationalities, and then it became the name. But then I looked who uses the term nationality and minority in the written proceedings, and the result is interesting. Only Jews and Germans from the former Russian Empire and the Hungarian part of the Habsburg Empire use the term nationalities in the discussions. I would say these groups had identified themselves as nationalities before 1914 and did not adopt the new terminology at once. That could be a reason. The second point I could see in the sources is minority rights is used in conjunction with international law because these minority treaties are part of international law. When they talk of nationality rights, this is in conjunction with domestic law. So there could be a distinction in the law terminology, but then again, not all of the participants are lawyers. And so there are different usages as well. For example, the German Secretary General from Estonia talks about a nationality problem and particular minority problems, saying that there is a big nationality problem and some minority problems. The Slovene president put it the other way around, saying that the European nationality problem was not a problem of national minorities in some concrete states only, adding maybe that there is room for nationalities as well, but here we can only speculate. We have a Slovene educated in Vienna speaking in French, so maybe it's not that good for conceptual history, but you get some ideas. And what I would clearly say, these terms were not used haphazardly, but more often with a special purpose, but most of the speakers don't give us their purpose. We have to look into the context. What we can clearly, the Catalans never used the term minorities to describe their situation. They were talking Easterlich about minority rights, but never for minority rights in Spain. That was not seen as the adequate term to discuss the situation. So minorities implied a reference to Central and Eastern Europe or to population groups that were protected by an international treaty or obligation, adding Turkey and Iraq later. So nationalities, on the other hand, was not used exclusively to refer to population groups that were not protected by international treaty or obligation. So the Germans in Italy and South Tyrol were never addressed as a German. That always they are speaking about a German minority, and there is no treaty. And you can see that there is, on the other hand, they speak about nationality groups in Central and Eastern Europe as well, though this is still, the term is still living. And I would say when somebody spoke of nationalities, that was to put it in a domestic context and to look for a domestic solution, like this paritative committees, autonomy laws, self-government, or anything like this. And if somebody spoke of minority rights, the clear suggestion was we need an international mediator to solve our problems. We are not able to solve the problem ourselves within our state. So this is one of the conclusions, and the idea to generalize it. So the problem is, as I said, we have rarely concrete definitions, but most of the speakers do not equate nationalities and minorities. Of course, the term minority was used much more often after 1918 because there were these minority treaties and obligations, while nationality was not a legal term in this context. So the language of the treaties had a huge influence on the semantic shift. That was what Francesca had in the conclusion as well. So the term minorities had gained the sovereignty over the discourse at the end of the 1920s, when the debate over a possible reform of the minority protection system reached its peak in the run-up to the 1929 League Assembly, which was held in Madrid to welcome Spain back again in the League of Nations. But then it became clear there was no real reform, and the case I study of the Ukrainians in Poland, there is a pacification, and the League of Nations is able to help these people. So all my activists understand that minority treaties and the League won't help the minorities to have a better life. So they need new concepts, and they come back to this domestic context and the nationality laws. So nationality has a comeback in the 1930s. That is what I could clearly see. And now our old actors come back. Gabris and Pellissier revive their activities and publish a Revue des nationalités et des minorités nationales. So you can see, and I would say this is absolutely no coincidence. The same in 1931, Ewald Amende starts to travel to Spain and interest himself more in the situation of nationalities in Spain. This is a clear indication that they look for autonomy solutions, and a possible example to follow is the Catalan autonomy. And interestingly, I have it in the paper, he mentions Galicians, but calling them primordial Portuguese, Urportugiesen. So, so they come in the context. You can see they saw it didn't turn out in the Central and Eastern European context, and now you have seen the Union of Nationalities had all this autonomy debate, and the only continuity from the participating groups are the Catalans. All other nationality groups become majorities, and so the only group that participate in the Union of Nationalities and the Congress of European Nationalities are the groups from Spain, which is remarkably, they just looked for new partners to internationalize their task. And you can see it in other discussions. I put Gilbert Murray, who was the public face of the British League of Nations Union, and he in 1933 said autonomy is the only remedy, and saying, but in our political reality, autonomy will never become reality. But you can see these people clearly reject the idea of minority rights. Of course, it has to do with the rise of power by Hitler in Germany. But what I would say, the semantic pendulum swung back from minorities in the direction of nationalities, but then it came in the direction of this Volksgruppen discourse, and then we could look at the Sudeten Germans first want autonomy, and then they go on to want revision. So we have something like a comeback of this autonomy. You could argue it's only tactical not to advocate for revision first, but you see it's in the discourse and people debate it. And in 1945, finally, I give you the book Nationalities and National Minorities by the Jewish scholar. So you see, it's not minorities that are the successor of nationalities. It's somehow the history has to be written on parallel terms. That's what I would suggest. And it's, of course, you see it's a different context. For nationality rights, it's more way to look for solutions that people can live peacefully next to each other and don't start to fight wars. And this is of course the thing that Austria-Hungary tried before the war, but then it turned out differently. But this is just to give you an idea what we can study, and just to show that there is a sense to do it transnational and even to look at Western European nationality groups and link them, so you get some different ideas. And I would also like to broaden the horizon to the Scandinavian discussions, but there's absolutely no research literature on it. But maybe you have some, I would be glad to hear about. So that's for the moment. Thank you.